Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Friday. Jackie Stang here. Welcome to Meet Delic Presents Microdose Live. How are you spending your weekend? How are you feeling today? What did you have for breakfast? Before we get going, we're going to set an intention for today's conversation. We can set any intention. We can set an intention for the weekend too if we want. It's up to you. I can't tell you how to do it. Only you can do that for yourself. But let's just take a minute and consider all the things going on in the world, in America right now. It's pretty heavy. I turned on the news this morning for the first time and shit is crazy. So, setting an intention. Think about what you want to get out of this conversation. Why are you here? Why are you interested in psychedelics? Why are you interested in microdosing specifically, or dosing? I'm interested in microdosing. I'm interested in psychedelics because conscious people don't tend to kill people. Conscious people don't tend to incite violence. Conscious people like to find solutions. Conscious people find solutions to things like mental health, right? And we're in a mental health crisis in addition to being in an epidemic. So now that we've set our intention, Meet Delic is the first ever psychedelic wellness summit. And speaking of Meet Delic, I have a question for you guys. The first time you ever went to a live concert, who was playing? For me, it was Metallica. Who was playing for you? What kind of access did you have? What did it sound like? What did it feel like? That collective force, that energy is the energy that I and the team at Delic are committed to bringing to you for Meet Delic. So we, in case you haven't heard it yet, are moving Meet Delic to May 1st and 2nd, 2021, so that we have a better understanding of how to keep you guys healthy and safe, but also how to learn about psychedelics while having fun in person. And so Meet Delic, May 1st and 2nd, 2021. Yeah, in the meantime, we're bringing you these free events for the next 12 months or so. And it's going to be amazing because knowledge is power. And we're very, very happy to have some of the best experts inside the psychedelic community and the adjacent communities. And again, bringing you free information. Speaking of free information, realitysandwich.com has over 8,000 pieces of free content, and there's literally not even advertising on the site right now. So take it while you can get it. We have free substance guides that include microdosing on specific substances. Those are living documents. They're constantly being updated and participated in through other people's research. So realitysandwich.com. All right, that's it with the plugs. Here's what to expect from today's conversation. It's a little bit different than the last time. We have some amazing experts here to give us their wisdom. So we're going to talk, we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be amazing. We're going to do a giveaway of another Meet Delic jacket. Shout out to the Meet Delic jacket. Shout out to the Hey You Monkey. We're going to do a giveaway after the conversation, and then we're going to spend more time than we did last time giving you guys time to ask questions. So what we're looking for in terms of the giveaway are super participants, people just ramped up, asking a ton of questions, being super positive. And then we'll get into those questions later and then give somebody the jacket. So that's what to expect. All right, let's get into the speakers. I'm going to introduce the speakers for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to get going. I'm a big fan of this guy. Del Potter, Mr. Del Potter, Ph.D., is a Chief Science Officer and founder of Leaf Holdings and ZBN Research. Del spearheads the development of, stand by. He spearheads the development of new endocannabinoid pharmaceutical and psychedelic formulations. Here's what I love about Del. I'm going to read a bunch of words to you from his bio. Medical anthropology, ethnopsychopharmacology, phytochemistry, psychoactive indigenous botanical pharmacopoeia, psychiatric anthropology, psychoanalysis, analytical chemistry, and chemical engineering. So Del is like super nerd in the best way possible. And he comes at these issues of substances, chemicals, psychedelics, cannabis from all these different angles, which I think is so, so important inside the psychedelic conversation. You can find out more at leaforganics.com. Welcome, Del. Next, we've got Jen Price. She is the organizing director of Decrim CA, Decrim California, San Francisco. Ethnogen, she refers to herself, which I think is amazing. Ethnogen with a J, is a psychedelic activist, coach, and educator with 7 years of experience providing therapeutic support to those seeking healing and expansion through the use of ethnogens, both in the micro and macro level. In that time, Jen has consistently practiced what she's preached, maintaining a regular microdosing regimen and partaking in many ceremonial experiences, the healing effects which have fueled her passion to help bring psychedelics into the light. We're super stoked to hear about her experiences. Welcome, Jen. All right, and the next guy, big fan of our next expert. Mr. Zak Garcia is very much a sought after marketing and leadership strategist who has built huge virtual teams. And so since we're all working from home virtually, like this guy knows how to do it because it's not easy. He's built teams that have done over 100 million in sales. He recently launched an online course on virtual team leadership. Definitely go check that out, virtualteamleadershipcourse.com. Great URL, virtualteamleadershipcourse.com. And we'll have notes about that as well. Also, he's the current CMO of CBD Capital Group, interim CEO of Mana Artisan Botanics, and the former CMO of Bulletproof, where of course I know him from. Welcome, Zak. So glad to have you. Let's keep it going. Oh yes, another fan favorite, another Jackie favorite. I just love all these experts here today. Flor Bollini was named the corporate shaman by Forbes magazine and recently featured in Fortune magazine. Florencia has over a decade of experience as one of the pioneering practitioners of the plant medicine world. She has developed and introduced an expert system that has set the standard for the administration and integration of 5-MeO-DMT. Raise your hand if you're interested in 5-MeO, the most potent psychoactive compound in the world. Her empathetic, feminine approach to serving and integrating psychoactive medicines has been adopted by the leaders in the space and has made Flor one of the most sought after psychospiritual entrepreneurs in the space. She's also my friend. Welcome, Flor. You can find out more about the work, amazing work she's doing at Nana Heals, nanheals.com. And last but not least, we've got Tyler Ippoliti. Tyler has been a personal trainer and holistic lifestyle coach in the Bay Area for 8 years. Shout out to Luke Story, a speaker at Meet Delic, who connected me to Tyler. Tyler's been working with the plants consistently for 3 years and doesn't ever see himself not doing so. That's pretty smart. He's pretty awesome. And because of his personal experiences, he gets to help an assortment of his clients become healthier and happier on a daily basis. Sometimes his work includes microdosing and sometimes it doesn't. He works a lot with psilocybin. Super stoked to have Tyler on. Welcome to my guests. All right. Now we're gonna go. So in this first round, let's call it a round robin. I'm going to go Del, Jen, Zach, Flor, Tyler, and I want you guys to tell us your general philosophy on dosing, and of course, including microdosing in that, and how it pertains to your experience in the psychedelic realm. So let's get going with Del. I'm going to give everyone like three minutes to do so. All right, Del, go for it. Del, you're on mute, buddy.
Yeah, I come out of an older tradition, more of a macrodose tradition. And, you know, I experienced tremendous benefit, life-changing benefit from larger doses of psychedelics. I'm very interested, though, in the medical potential of microdosing. I believe that there may be incredible differences between both LSD and psilocybin microdosing, that LSD may help with attention deficit disorder in subperceptual doses, and that psilocybin may be more helpful with emotional disorders like anxiety and depression. The real interesting thing for me about microdosing is the way it slows time down and begins to focus perception, so that as people use it on a daily basis, people who are in too much of a rush and their attention is distracted and is focused everywhere, it allows them to be more in the moment, be more in the now, and be able to focus attention. So that's why I think it may have tremendous benefit for attention deficit disorder and stuff like that. The psilocybin microdosing seems to open up, bring forward emotional issues. It may be that it could be used as an adjunct of therapy because it brings forward memories, ideas of trauma, stuff like that. So I'm really super interested in microdosing. For me, up to this point, I've really thought microdosing was sort of putting the training wheels on, and a way to be introduced to it. But what's interesting is that most people who microdose actually have a background in a previous background in macrodosing in general. So, and there's not a lot of people who try microdosing just themselves for the first time. So I'm very interested, and I believe that it's a topic that is really opening up and may have a lot of potential.
Thank you. Amazing. Yeah, I read something on our site, realitysandwich.com recently, and that said microdosing, i.e. taking a sub-perceptual dose of a psychedelic substance. And we can get into that later, but I'd like to think what we're really talking about here is dose in general, right? Microdosing is interesting because you can get potentially some really amazing benefits from it without having to, spend 12 hours tripping, and then have longer term mental health benefits. But welcome, Del. Super stoked to have you. Thank you so much. All right, Jen, we're going to get into you real quick. Give us a quick bit about your philosophy on dosing and microdosing.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of that, I found it interesting that people do seem to be kind of in one camp or the other. Like people who mostly do macrodosing kind of look down on microdosing sometimes, and microdosers can be afraid of the macrodose. And I really think that there's a place for all of it. And it's such a beautiful thing about psychedelics that whether your jumping off point is really going for it with a huge dose and then you want to do more of working it into your daily life, or whether based on your mental health situation or stigma or fear of doing a bigger dose, makes it so starting with a smaller dose is actually more approachable. It helps you start kind of opening up your brain networks and working with yourself in a certain kind of way that makes a bigger dose kind of more palatable to some people who are like newly coming in. So I really like that. I think that there's a place for all of it. Big doses do a different thing than smaller doses do, but I think that they're kind of mutually supportive. And yeah, I mean, I personally have had huge benefits from microdosing, and I actually started, I basically had like some really healing bigger doses and found myself with some mushroom chocolates, and would randomly, and not randomly, but it would be on days that I would describe as like feeling rough around the edges, or just like a day where you wake up and you're just like, ugh, something's off. And I found myself just compelled to take like little nibbles of these chocolates, and didn't think that much about it, but found a huge benefit from it. And that was before I knew microdosing was even a thing. So especially once I started learning more about neurobiology and psychology in grad school, and then overlapping that with what's actually going on with psychedelics, just the two working in tandem, or just psychedelics as a way of really tuning into yourself and working with yourself, and kind of being your own physician, and building a trust with yourself that you know what dose could help you at what time, or kind of putting that into your own hands, I think is supported by the psychedelics, because they open your mind in a way that makes you trust yourself more. But it's this kind of like tandem relationship that happens. And I think microdosing is like a beautiful kind of more low-key, easier to fold into your everyday life version of psychedelics. But yeah.
Love it. Know your dose. It's really the dose makes the poison, right? Everything is toxic at a certain dose. So awesome to have you here, Jen. Thank you so much. All right, Zach, we have a history of biohacking together. So I know that you have some deep thoughts and experiences on just dosing in general, whether it's like, bacon, butter, or cannabis. So what's your general philosophy on dosing?
Yeah, dosing is really important. Everybody's biology is obviously different. And whether we're talking about psychedelics or other forms of medications or other substances, smart drugs, things like that, it's really important for people to understand how to experiment for themselves and know not to push your limits too far. Like another thing is, and I see this in the chat, PTSD. I'm a combat veteran, so I suffered from PTSD. I think everybody has PTSD, has trauma in their life. So I'm really interested in the application of psychedelics and microdosing on treating people's trauma and helping them process that, because especially right now, what's going on in the world and everything that people are dealing with, it's really hard to know, do I numb out to stay alive and to stay functional? And when do I process the things that I'm either dealing with or not fully dealing with? And so whether microdosing is a door that can open for you to start processing things, or if it's something that you want to use to experiment with your performance, I think it's something that a lot of people are interested in. And I love that this conversation is, the headline is microdosing, but the key is really dosing in general. And what does that mean? And for example, nicotine is something that, microdosing currently, right? And Jackie could talk about overdosing on nicotine, if we want to tell that story, probably not, but it's important that people understand that, there is a limit. There is, you're probably going to over microdose a little bit when you're first trying out, and that's okay. So create a scenario in which you can get away with that if you do.
I love it. Well said, sir. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example quickly about my experience with macrodosing. What was it? Nicotine, accidentally. Back in my days as a biohacker, I had heard our friend Dave Asprey talk about nicotine as a performance enhancer. And I'm not always the best scientist, but here's like to the point of microdosing or dosing in general or psychedelics in general. Everyone, it's like we're inside of this giant science experiment. Everyone should consider themselves a scientist. And there's like scientific protocol and process, which someone like Del could explain to us. But I'm kind of a lazy scientist. So instead of like researching and understanding the dose, I just slapped whatever like the top dose is of a nicotine patch from CVS. I just patched that on. I'd never had any nicotine in my system. And I was it was really bad. It was really bad. I was keeled over and sick for 24 hours. But I mean, it taught me a great lesson about dosing and reading and reading the dosage requirements and understanding how my body is going to work with a substance. And that's always different than how somebody else's body is working with it. Thank you so much, Zach. Super stoked to have you here. All right, Flor, I know you have a lot of amazing thoughts on dosing, tons of experience. What's your general philosophy?
I always like to make the parallel with lovemaking, right? And so imagine know that you are a virgin, and kind of it's good to start slowly, right? Like kind of with like a tantric lover. So he takes the time to get you there, and eventually you get all the way, right, to like the heroic dose. But it is a process in which, rather than pushing yourself, right, that can hurt, that can be scary, it's actually like something that you ease yourself into. And in working with 5-MeO, it became very evident of the need to what then eventually I call progressive dosing technique. So we can start with a microdose, right? But then we can double that microdose, it becomes a small dose. And then that small dose, we can double it again, and we can keep on doing that process. So eventually, in the course of a bit more of time, you can get to that full dose. But it's in a process in which your ego, rather than be like, whoa, it's like, oh, actually, it's like way more elegant how you can serve that way, right? And so what I've noticed is that the same principle applies to every compound. And that actually the same compound in a small dose or in a full dose, it has a completely different variety of effects, which is also fascinating, right? So I think that especially introducing psychoactives to the world, like my mom, right, or my dad that is 85, and now he's in quarantine. And so dosing him a tiny bit of mushroom is like, oh, suddenly he's calm, but he doesn't feel anything, but he has a great day. And then eventually my mom, in her own space, in her own trust, she took the whole mushroom and she called me champagne from the garden and like celebrating life. But it would have been very different if from the 0 to 10, I would start with a heroic dose. And I think in essence is, and maybe this is the feminine approach, right? Like to going slowly into something and being maybe more cautious. And for sure, you know, the full dissolution experience is the ultimate experience we can have. But there is no hurry to get there. It doesn't mean that the first time we have to go all the way, because then there is no way back. And so as getting into extreme cold water, right? We go slowly. First we put a feet further and we go with confidence. And then in that way, we can endure longer in that extremity of intensity rather than going on jumping, you get out immediately. So in order for harm reduction or so forth, what I would say is like, it's just a journey, right? And it's a one-way road. When we get introduced to this, you know, like they call it the path of the gods, right? It's like there is no hurry. There is a lifetime to, and if it's not in the first time that we go all the way, it's like a first small dose to introduce the compound. It's like, oh, okay. And then from that initial dose, we can double it. And also, you are your shaman, you heal yourself. I always encourage people to feel what feels good for them. And if you never had, you know, any psychoactive experience, if you have no personal development, to go into a heroic dose sometimes means that it's a bombard of information that you don't know what to do with it. And it comes with the light and it comes with the shadow. So sometimes it's too much to process all of that at the same time, right? And so maybe sequencing that process in whatever make you feel comfortable. You are not going to be less of a man. Everyone is nervous. It's okay to be nervous. And I've noticed that sometimes men feel that they have to do the heroic dose because if not, it's like, no, not at all. On the contrary, right? It's like a matter of whatever feels good for you. And I think that to have that integrity to say, no, thank you so much. Don't give me that bomb. I would appreciate it. May take longer in time, but that, again, like with lovemaking, we don't want to be in a hurry when we have our first time, right? So
that's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, listen, I learned the hard way in my experience, in my mental health journey, that I'm my own shaman, right? And I want everyone to really believe that. If I could give anybody advice in this space, it would be self-responsibility. But with that means that you are your own shaman. A couple years ago went looking for saviors. You know, we all do it. But guess what? Only you can save you. Yeah. Thank you, Flor. Thank you so much. All right, last but not least, then we'll get into kind of a roundtable open discussion. Tyler, what is your general philosophy on dosing and its practical use in your work?
Yeah, firstly, I like to approach it with inviting anybody who's looking to get into it, that it's you working with the medicine, whatever the medicine is. It's not just consuming something. So much of our culture is consumption. I take a pill, I have less pain. I take a medicine and all my problems are fixed. And that's just simply not the case. If you really want to get down into deep trauma or deep work and getting healthier in general, it has to be you putting in time and effort and desire and intention into it to be able to work with whatever it is, whatever modality or medicine you're choosing to use. So first is, understanding that symbiotic relationship. And then next is the why. Why do you want to take what you're taking? And that is going to kind of guide you, in my opinion, how much to take. If you're working with something that's truly, childhood trauma type stuff, maybe it's a macro dose to be able to uncover maybe things you don't even remember because it's so long ago, or just suppressed and you have no idea about it. That's where a macro dose can come into play. But maybe, on a daily basis, you're experiencing anxiety about going to work every morning, and, you have to walk into the front door and approach your boss, and that anxiety is just, building and building each day. Maybe a microdose is more appropriate for you in that situation, because it's going to be more enlightening for you to understand that emotion and work with it as you're going in a day-to-day basis. So yeah, approaching each that way and seeing what is appropriate for you in that time. That's how I feel one should approach it.
Yeah, it really takes me back to the idea of intention, right? Which is kind of like the why. It could be the why. And many years of experimenting with substances went by before I actually conceptualized the intention and like, oh wait, no, I have the power here to set the stage and direct the ship. And that takes effort and consciousness and like practice of like actually saying like, why are we all here? Awesome. Thank you, Tyler, for being here. All right. So we're going to get into some general topics on microdosing, dosing in general, practical applications, science, mental health, safety. I want everyone to really kind of talk as you want to. And then just for the audience, people joining now, we're going to do a giveaway of this amazing jacket. Yeah. Meet Delic jacket at the end of this conversation, where we're going to open it up to about 20-25 minutes of the experts answering your questions. So I think it's prudent to start practically. And it seems like Tyler and Jen are the most active in using microdosing with their clients one-on-one. So Tyler, let's bring it back to you for a second. And then Jen, I'd love to hear from you too, and whoever else, like so I'm a client, right? I come to you, I'm interested in like being happier and healthier. I'm interested in microdosing. Like, how would you weave that into the program for a new client?
Yeah. So when somebody comes to me with that question, I just basically continue the conversation and ask them what's going on for them. What are they working with on a day-to-day basis? What do they think that they need in general in life as far as health goes? I approach everybody in a broader conversation of health. So mental, physical, and there's no differentiation between the two, right? The mental health is going to affect the physical health. So with that, after the conversation continues and they tell me what they think they might need, I ask them more questions about their past and getting into deeper issues about things that might have held them back in the past. I do a lot of childhood trauma coaching. So if they're open to that conversation, and that's a big question, a lot of people are not even open to get into that type of conversation. If they're open to it, then we'll get into it.
But most of the trauma, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I would wager that most of the trauma we experience comes from our childhood.
All of the deeper stuff, right? 0 to 7 is going to be what's most impressing on our psychology, from my understanding. So yeah, if they're open to that conversation, then we'll have that conversation. And then if they're open to it, then what I'll invite them to consider is how can the medicine bringing more light to their emotions help them in assisting them essentially digest all of these things from the past that they need to digest. Now, it doesn't always go this smoothly, as I've already said. So if they're not open to having this conversation and they're just, I want to microdose, or I want to dose in general, I'm pretty hesitant to that. And I like to have a longer conversation again about the why, and just bring the why to light so that they can really understand that it's the medicine, whatever dose, is not going to solve their problems. So I'd like to have a long conversation before anything happens, any recommendations happen whatsoever. And then if the conversation goes well and they're open to having the conversation, then we could talk about, what a protocol could be. But if there's no willingness to have a conversation with really the why and what they want to solve in this, and it's just, I want to do it because other people are doing it and I've heard a lot about it, then I basically ask, like, hey, if you want to have a deeper conversation around this, then I'm willing to do that. But if not, then I'm not the person to be working with you right now.
Sure, that makes sense. That seems like a safe mode. Are you so you work with psilocybin? Are you willing to talk about dosages or application and stuff you found that works for your clients?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I'm in the Bay Area right now, so I work with a lot of people that are in tech, like really deep tech. And what I've noticed is, and what I find really interesting, is the difference in the microdose applicable to whatever a daily situation is like for the one using it. So if a person's like really creative and they're deep in their work, they're on their computer or they're doing art, some sort of design in general, they can take a little bit higher of a microdose. So anything from like 0.3 to 0.5, which for me, as I'm working with people on a daily basis, face-to-face, conversationally, would be overwhelming for me. There's no way that I would take that much working with my clients face-to-face.
Yeah, we should say too, a general regular dose, whatever that means, is understood to be around 3 grams. So we're talking, minuscule amounts of that.
Yeah, we're talking 0.1 to 0.5 is typically what I address as a microdose. So yeah, and then those that are that tend to be really sensitive, like for myself, I work with 0.15 on a daily basis. Not every day. We can get into that if you want, but for me, because I'm face to face, and I notice that if I take too much or a larger microdose, then it really inhibits my connection and my communication skills in general. I become a little bit distracted.
Got it. It's that amount that's sub-perceptual, as I mentioned earlier in the intro, which is interesting because it's like, well, some people, are you really not perceiving it? You know what I mean? But
well, it enhances the flow state for those that are going deep into their work, right? So maybe they're so deep into their work. This is my experience, that they're so deep and connected with their work that they're not really even noticing anything else other than them being really enticed by their work.
Yeah.
So maybe it's perceptual elsewhere, but it really helps them.
Yeah.
With whatever they're doing.
I'd love to hear from Jen and anyone else. Del, I'd love to hear from you too about, you're in the lab, so to speak. But let's go to Jen first, and then you guys jump in if you want, about kind of like how you practically apply microdosing with your clients and yourself, Jen.
Yeah, and just real quick too, on the concept of the term sub-perceptual is usually what's used for it. And I actually, maybe that's the zone that is truly most comfortable for some people, and I believe it still has an effect. But I tend to aim for, definitely personally, in what I've seen with clients, like the zone where they feel like something's actually happening isn't actually fully sub-perceptual, but it's sub-psychedelic for sure. Like the world still looks the way it looked, maybe a little HD, but like you feel a little something. Like I aim for a zone where there's almost like I describe it as like a lightness of being, or like something that registers like I took that, but 20 minutes later, you can forget that you even took it. So as a rule, feeling wise, that's kind of a zone that I aim for. And then with clients, I see it as, so I ride an interesting line. Like I'm a psychotherapist, I do straight psychotherapy work, and I can't cross the zones currently, which is a part of what I'm really hoping changes soon in the future. But So I come to psychedelic coaching through a therapeutic lens, but I kind of am careful about what work I do where. But with psychedelic coaching and microdosing coaching specifically, I see it largely as what I'm finding that people need the most is kind of education is a huge part of it. Just how does it work? What's the dosing? What are the different schedules that you can do? What effect can I expect? Like, does it match what somebody's looking to work with? Like, does that match what microdosing can actually legitimately help with? So there's a whole educational aspect there, and then kind of an educational / coaching aspect of like, I believe that you can microdose and have an effect, like it will have an effect on your life and the way that you're interacting and processing, etc., even if you're not actively engaging in that or having an intention in it. But I think that if you're actively engaging in it and having an intention in it, and especially if you're adding in other practices that are kind of optimizing the fact that your brain system is opened up, you're doing more global processing, your emotional center is more active and able to, like, has a higher capacity. I think that adding practices that help kind of root that landscape in helps to make for longer lasting, like more deeply therapeutic changes. So it's kind of a combination of education. This is what the substance is that you're working with. And then here's kind of like my thoughts about working with yourself and how those two can converge. And then personalizing it for where somebody is and what they're looking to do with it.
Yeah, it really is personal. Dale, what do you think? You, as you said, you come from the macrodose world, which I do as well. But like, what do you think? Because you're seeing it on the chemistry level, right? And dealing with the substances that way.
So from a pharmaceutical level, if you were producing a drug that you were, sort of putting out into the public, you might want to consider making it subperceptual. That is somewhere between 10 and 20 milligrams. In recent studies, I just was talking to Dr. Kim Kupfer, who's doing the research for MindMed on microdosing. And she said that at 20 milligrams, some people notice that they have like a door in their office that has a psychedelic painting. The painting started moving a little bit. That may not be something that you can take every day and go to work. If you're in a meeting or something and everything starts moving, it might not be the most optimum situation. So you want to find a dose that's, I think, for microdosing, that's sort of subperceptual, if that's what you're trying to accomplish. And then the idea is, again, that, with mushrooms, you're really more bringing out emotional and anxiety-related issues. With LSD, it's more about attention and focus. And that seems to be bared out in the recent research that's being done. Most people say that the LSD really contributes to creativity, to enlarging one's attention span so that it's more focused. Whereas the psilocybin is going to be more for bringing forward memories or emotional issues or dealing with anxiety. I don't know that either, I think you would want to use caution using microdosing for personality disorders like bipolar and stuff like that. That might be something that you want to use with a psychologist or a psychotherapist. But in general, I think there is a potential for tremendous benefit from it.
Well, there's other substances that people are microdosing, maybe less so in the media, right? But I've heard people talk about microdosing all of it, all the substances. In my experience, I'm not like so sure about microdosing ketamine. Ketamine's kind of like really interesting as it relates to LSD and psilocybin, for example. Microdosing MDMA is really, it's kind of just like a small dose or whatever the placebo dose would be in like a current study. And then people, I don't even know if you can microdose DMT, but I know that Flor has a lot of elegant thoughts on this. So Flor, what do you think?
Thank you. For me, the part I love the most about microdosing is that, and even with THC, right? It's like they give me a gummy of 10 milligrams and suddenly I'm shaking, And have experience with full dose is like kind of make my day possible. So I find that the small dose allow me to kind of take the edge when they were saying is that those days that are maybe not so great, or that I like a bit of the motivation to do certain things that I don't want to do, and suddenly the microdose give me that boost to kind of brighten up and maybe allow me to be more present, a bit less in my head, more in my heart, but it's been a great day. And the fact that also most medicines, we understand that we take them when we are sick. But what about medicines that we can take to be better human beings, right? To be more creative, to be more open, to be more grateful, or even to tap into my meditation, or to do an intention setting, or to be able to go to the ocean and connect with the waves. It definitely helped me with my neurosis, get out of my head, into my heart, into my body. And either if that is with THC, with mushrooms or LSD or ibogaine or 5-MeO, the principle applied to any compound, right? And also I think it makes it way more affordable to include it in my everyday life, rather than having to take a whole day or 2 days if I do a heroic dose or a big dose, right? It doesn't allow me to go with my day. So as a replacement also of antidepressants, right? It's like how extraordinary that just a tiny thing of a mushroom, if you just take it every day, holds you in there, like, right? Like so many people supporting them in living SSRIs, right? And actually how the microdose of mushroom provide them the stability, not to just fall, in their face to the floor. So I think that understanding this part of like every compound can actually just help us tap more into our soul. And entheogen means that, reveals the God within. And even if it's in a super minuscular dose, it's so important to have that sense of self, that kind of sparks. And sometimes I think it's also interesting to notice that you may do it for a couple of days, and then the following day that you don't do it, you're still in there. It's kind of like the event, the effects continue. So I think it's one of the most revolutionary things, this idea that, we can use, and also like for the cost that it has, is so affordable, right? Like kind of one mushroom can be maybe the microdose for a month, right? So I think it's like it make it so accessible, and also allow the people to feel into themselves rather than indoctrinate every day. You have to take this drug. It's like feel into yourself. When do you need that you feel to enhance? And not only because you're feeling bad, but because also you want to have an extraordinary day and make that decision that this is the day you're going to have. You start your day with that intention, and I bet that the outcome is going to be like 90% that you achieve whatever you set the intention for that day.
Lovely. Dare I ask you real quick before we go to Zach, what do you think about these DMT pens that effectively are kind of microdosing people? I think because people don't really know how to consume DMT, not 5-MeO, but whatever other analog. What do you think about them floating around? Flor.
Oh, sorry. Apologize.
Or anyone. What do there's these DMT pens that are floating around.
So sorry, I saw that you said Del. I apologize. For me, the thing is like, because when you synthesize a compound that is actually a rocket to outer space, I will always try to keep it natural. That is my, other compounds we can totally synthesize. Then again, if we know that, let's say the 5-MeO DMT is medically grade done in a lab, that is perfect, right? But you need to know that it's been done at medicinal grade in a lab. The thing with the pens that I'm kind of quite apprehensive is like, I don't know where they're coming from. And normally it is synthesized. And then when I try, it's like, and suddenly I have a joker and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? It gives me anxiety. So my outer effect, I don't feel that was a medicine experience. Different is when I smoke Changa, and I got into the divine proportion, and I just go into planets, right? It's like, it's kind of an enhancing experience. Still, I find it sometimes to be too much information. So that's why I would never recommend to someone to have a full-on dose of DMT. Also understanding that, you know, I would, you know, they are like, I would say, like, I think that to scale, you know, to put it under FDA, they are compromise we make, and we work with synthetic for sure to standardize the dose and a lot of things. But unless we know that it's coming from a medicinal grade lab and that is done in the purest of form, I think that the risk that we have for the current underground production is just too risky. And it can be a very traumatic experience, or it has been for me, right? When I just take a really big hit of a compound that is not natural. At least when it's natural, I always trust that existence is taking care of it. And even if it's the most difficult journey of all, I can surrender to that, knowing that, you know, it's natural and that God has a plan. But when it's man-made and I don't know who created that, I would really be cautious about. It can always also be a tiny keys, right? To test how that, I would always say, always tiny keys first to test. We don't know where it's coming from. And I think that to understand that, unfortunately, these, you know, most of the case, the underground practitioners, what they, not practitioners, I mean like drug developers, is kind of raping a drug, a plant, and creating these, you know, drugs. And it's the same with acid. You can have the most amazing medicinal grade acid, and on the other hand, you can have those trips that are just like horrendous. And I think that that has a lot to do, not just with the person, I think it has to do with how that has been produced. And sometimes it is misconfused. So that's also why, even with acid, start with 1/4. Let's say if you're planning to do a full, right? And then if that feels good, okay, I can take another 1/4, then you are in half. And then if you want and you feel comfy, okay, keep on with another 1/4. Took you maybe 2 hours, but then you are in full dose, having tested the waters, right?
Love it.
The same applies for for DMT, 5-MeO, right? The more intense the compound, the more that I would take the same kind of approach.
Love it. Well, speaking of raping a plant, let's bring Zak in here. And then I think we should get to y'all's questions. I see you guys ramping up over 100 questions, and I'm going to get my girl Madison in here and let you guys go talk about what you want to talk about. Let's talk about CBD and THC. You know, we don't talk about it. We did a very bad job of marketing this idea in the cannabis green rush because it didn't equal large sales. If you're telling somebody to, you know, you can microdose THC, you could take half of a hit on a Saturday and like have an amazing journey. You don't have to actually overdose or, you know, take whatever regular dose of THC. But then also on the flip side of that, now we've taken CBD away from, in some instances, away from the cannabis plant, isolated it, and people aren't taking enough CBD to get the therapeutic benefits. We, don't really necessarily sell it on the shelves right now for people to be able to do that, but people also don't know that in the case of CBD, when it's on its own, it doesn't, you know, you need large doses of it. So Zak, what say you?
Yeah, it's really the biggest question, I think, in CBD right now, which is what is the proper dose and how can people effectively use it? And it's something that the FDA is obviously a little bit more open to CBD than THC and other things because it doesn't seem to have the psychoactive effects that are immediate. And I think that we're going to start to see companies figuring it out, CBD brands figuring out how do you recommend CBD usage for people. I saw this really interesting study the other day. It's not really a clinical study or anything, but anecdotally that CBD used in conjunction with meditation is actually very helpful, right? Because if CBD has an effect of a calming anti-anxiety effect for you, then it makes sense that if you're going to use that in conjunction with your meditation practice, that you could actually go a little bit deeper and it could be easier for you to get to that place that you're looking to get to. So I think the idea of intentionality is critical. And I think the idea of testing and trying to see what works for you, I encourage everybody that's interested in microdosing psychedelics to play around with other substances that you're already familiar and comfortable with. So even coffee, you know, like caffeine is something that most people use on a regular basis and are doing it completely unconsciously. And, you know, if I take a little sip of my Bulletproof coffee throughout the day, I cannot get that, I won't get that really intense, you know, feeling of like, oh, I'm excited, my heart's racing. I can kind of let it slowly affect me and it'll give me that little bit of extra boost that I'm looking for. So, and we talked about, you know, nicotine or whatever the thing is, you know, there's an optimal dosage for you. And I don't think there ever is going to be a standardized, you know, recommended dose for everybody. It should be based on what you feel comfortable with. So play around with the substances that you already are comfortable with and notice and pay attention to what's the difference. If I take don't drink any coffee for a few days and notice what happens to you. How do you feel? Maybe you're feeling more anxious, maybe you're feeling more tired, and then start to play with smaller amounts and see how that affects you and pay attention and journal about it, write it down and share your experience with people around you and get feedback, because you know, it really is unique to you and to your intentions and what you're looking to achieve. And I think that, you know, psychedelic substances have amazing benefits. And I've seen a lot of people in the chat talking about how it improves their empathy. The world needs a lot more empathy. I think that's if I could boil it down to one thing, it's like, if there was more empathy in the world, less individualism, less me, more we, then the world would be a better place. There's no doubt about it. And any of these substances that we're talking about today, I think can definitely improve that. And it's a combination. It's easy to use any substances as a crutch. And if you have to take a full dose or even a microdose of psilocybin every single day of your life, that's probably not ideal. Right? We've been talking about how do you cycle, what's the proper protocols for that, 2 days on, 1 day off, 5 days on, 2 days off, whatever it is. It's important that you are doing this not blindly, and it's not about looking to get a recreational usage. That's fine in certain circumstances. But if you're really serious about improving your life, improving the lives of those around you, then you should be taking it seriously and you should be extremely intentional about it. And there's a focus on you and your choices, the decisions, the reasons why, your intentions of why you're doing this, and then what are you actually looking to achieve? It's you know, experimenting, you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and that's why microdosing is really helpful, because you can slowly test and ramp up and find that optimal dose for you in the situation that you're using it for. And I think it's also important that people have times where they cycle off. I mean, you should cycle off everything and anything that you use in your life. And it's not even just substances. I mean, we should talk about microdosing the news. Should you be paying attention to the news every day, all day? You know, it's crazy right now more than ever, I think, that people are macrodosing the news, and that is extremely harmful for your mental health. You know, it's like I'm wearing this shirt, everybody counts or nobody counts. It's a favorite quote of mine from this book series by Michael Connelly on Harry Bosch. And it's really the truth. It's if we're going to say that everybody counts or nobody counts, then that means that it should be all of our goal and our responsibility to have an impact on that. And I think that by you using microdosing or any of these substances as a method for you to get to that optimal place where we can be more empathetic and we can share that and let other people know it's okay to do this, then that's great. But until we get buy-in from, you know, the governments of the world, a lot of people are asking too, like, well, how do you find the right substances? How do you know it's clean? How can you, you know, acquire these substances without getting in trouble? That's really what this is all about. Delic is at the forefront of that. That's why we're having these conversations, because we're trying to have an impact on the world and on the conversation in the ether. And if people look at us in this meeting right now as crazy people who just want everybody to be on drugs, then that's not going to help the movement, right? So I love that a lot of the people in this room, this virtual room, are doctors and researchers, and are taking the right precautions and the right disclaimers out there. And I think that's really critical for people that are interested in this topic, that they're doing it with a sense of responsibility towards all of us.
Beautiful. Empathy, that's a big one, right? You don't know it till you know it. And wouldn't it be nice if we could, I don't know, perhaps require that police officers take a certain microdose program before they get a gun? Just a thought. Could be something interesting for the future.
Well, all these ancient civilizations, and they used psychedelics as a rite of passage, right? And when you got to a certain age, you would go through that experience, and that would kind of be your transition into adult life. And I think that it doesn't have to be psychedelics, but there's not a rite of passage in our society really that's clearly defined. Some modern cultures will use national service as sort of a rite of passage. And I'm a huge proponent of that. And it doesn't have to be the military, whatever you're comfortable with, working in a hospital, working in a nursing home, or joining the military, or whatever it is, a sense of a national service that you're doing something for others is really, I think, a way for people to grow up and realize that it's not all about you. And that by us all choosing to have that be a part of our existence and a part of our acceleration through the different stages of life, that we can all actually take responsibility and be a part of something that's a greater society by doing that.
Totally. I think one of the women had something you wanted to say.
Yes, I wanted to build in what Zak said, that I think is such a great point of how to also reduce microdose maybe in substances that we've been taking a lot, let's say like coffee and sugar, and actually how microdosing psychoactive is a great replacement to help us achieve that. Right. So if we reduce on coffee, for instance, and if we've been for decades taking this substance, it shatters us a bit, but then microdose of LSD can help normalize that. Or even when you do microdose of mushroom, let's say the anxiety goes down. So the intake of sugar that we are taking and also so replacement is key with addiction, and whatever we are using in addiction in an addictive way, I think that this is a great protocol for us to explore when we want to get training, maybe less sugar, maybe less coffee, and we can then find maybe yerba mate has the strongest, but it's also more healthy. And so create these innovative protocols that we can create for ourselves to help us get out of where we are at, replace it with stevia, and that really changed a lot. How do we feel, the thoughts that we have, especially for us, we girls, right? And then having, let's say, full dose of CBD to the point, whatever that may be for you, and then reducing in sugar, putting a stevia, suddenly our day changes a lot. And then how can we combine microdoses, right? So if we do full dose of CBD with a microdose of THC, it creates an alchemy, for homeostasis that normally you don't have. And what if on top of that, we add a microdose of mushroom? How that suddenly is like start creating. So I think that always keeping in micro, it is interesting what that can happen, the effects that can have, and most important, how we can use it to get out, of drugs that are not serving us and we don't know how to get out.
Yeah, I mean, psychedelics or not, we're all taking lots of drugs every single day, whether we want to admit it or not. We are drugs. You are drug. I am drugs. Amazing. Okay, so let's do questions. Let's get into it. Madison has been watching and interacting. Madison, welcome to the table. What say you?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your great questions. There's so many here that I'm just hoping we'll have time to get to them all. The first one I want to throw out there is about how to get involved. A lot of people are like, I want to become a psychedelic therapist or researcher. I have these qualifications. How do I do something that matters right now? And this is to anyone. Feel free to answer, any of our panelists.
Dell's answering.
We need more medicinal chemists.
Yes.
Medicinal chemistry is the area where we're creating new drugs and modifying psychedelic compounds to more precisely reach the goals that we're after. one of the things we try to do is reverse engineer compounds by looking at what we're trying to achieve and then trying to develop a chemistry or a biochemistry to create that effect. And I think we need more of that for sure.
But how does one do that? How do they take the steps to get through that door?
Advanced degrees in chemistry. All
those degrees I read out of yours, Del. all of those specialties I read out.
Yeah, I mean, just concentrate on chemistry. I think science is kind of neglected in our culture, and it's an important dimension that more people need to pursue.
The chemistry lab, that aspect of the psychedelic movement, like occasionally worries me, right? We had Shulgin and everyone knows Albert Hoffman, and but really to like emphasize how cool it is to train in that regard, to train in the lab. And even occasionally you can partner with the FDA, right? Even though some of these are still Schedule I and illegal, you can partner with the government to study them.
Canada doesn't have any laws against analogs. So if you conduct your research in Canada, you can do research and development without having to worry about whether or not you're producing an analog. The United States says that anything that kind of resembles another molecule is in fact illegal. But in Canada, they don't have that rule, so you can produce unusual compounds. And many other countries have that same idea. We are still working off all the work that Alexander Shulgin did. I used to go to dinners at his house, and he was an incredible person. There's one compound, for example, that MindMed is exploring called DOI, which has a lot of activity at the 5-HTP2A receptor, which seems to influence inflammation. So it just generally removes inflammation throughout the body. And there are indications that activity at that receptor, which most psychedelics do, some do more than others, may be used for treatments of inflammation like asthma, diabetes, neuropathy, all the kinds of diseases that are associated with inflammation. So, and I just wanted to say one other thing about DMT. DMT is really hard to do a subperceptual dose of. There's kind of you walk off the end of a plank, and pretty much as soon as you get to a threshold dose, you're off on a rocket ship. So I think it's very difficult. My introduction to 5-MeO was in the Amazon, where native peoples who do, in many cases, use psychedelic substances every day, several times a day. They have a process where they, you blow a snuff up another person's nose, and the effect is pretty dramatic. The first
That's
time
Vilca, right?
Yopo or Vilca,
Yopo, yeah.
A couple different names for it, but it's like being put in an elevator and shot out of a cannon, literally, psychically. What I noticed immediately was that foreground and background changed places. All the things that you put in the background in terms of unconscious thoughts, in terms of just your regular perception, we get through the day by focusing. All of that stuff changed places. All the stuff I focused on went into the background. All the stuff I was missing came into the foreground. And it was profound, really interesting.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Madison, let's get into another question.
Yeah, so this one relates to some stuff we were already talking about, having to do with studies that are done with synthetic psilocybin or isolated molecules versus the role of naturally derived products, and how to get studies around that as well, like a full mushroom, for instance.
I can talk about, from my perspective, not so much about the studies, but it's like when we do reductionism, right? Like from the whole entourage, let's say in the case of 5-MeO, we have bufotenin, right? There are over 30 molecules around the 5-MeO compound, right? And is kind of a big compromise, losing all those other entourage of molecules around it. And I think that the difficulty to, how FDA, is a structure is like you have to create a whole road for each compound. So it's kind of literally impossible to, find a way to bring, let's say, bufotenine with all the different compounds that goes around the 5-MeO. But from that perspective, I think it's just common sense and deduction that when we can work with something that has been done by nature, I would always choose that. And like with the cannabidol, right? Within the cannabidol, the plant of cannabis, the two main compounds that you have is the THC that is psychoactive and the CBD that is non-psychoactive, but still there are a lot of entourage of molecules within the cannabidol that they communicate between each other in ways that we don't understand. And that then when we take that internally, the natural compound, our body has those receptors too. So then they are like talking and singing and dancing and create a lot of like homeostasis, let's say, that for us women to help regulate our hormones is key. So every time that we can take a compound alone, natural, is a no-brainer, right? And I think that we use the synthetic when it's, the reductionism, when we have to compromise in order to achieve scale or to make it legal, right? Or to be prescribed by doctors, or, but knowing that if we can grow it in our garden, if we can have access to natural medicines, always nature knows better than humans. That's at least my experience and my perspective.
I also agree with that. Any clients that I approach talking health and fitness with, if we're going to talk food and nutrition, we're going to talk whole plants and foods, right? Same thing, in my opinion, with the with the medicines here. If you could approach it and you have access to, and that's kind of the problem, is like the problem with, ayahuasca down in the Amazon right now is that eventually if we all go down there and use it, it's going to be gone, right? So if you're interested in participating in like the cultivation and regeneration of the plant while being a part of the culture and using it as well, then, there are retreat centers that are helping the entire culmination and process of the medicines as well, mushrooms. So being a part of it that way is really cool as well.
We're working on a project to be able to curate a comprehensive inventory of psychedelic mushrooms and botanicals, starting out with psychedelic mushrooms, trying to do as comprehensive a tissue culture library as possible, and then developing cultivation techniques for all of them. And then phase 2, we're going to be inquiring botanicals. I had originally thought that we were going to do this in Jamaica, but we're proceeding with Schedule 1 DEA licensing here, and we may be able to, we've gotten some good feedback so far, and we may be able to build the facility here in Northern California.
Amazing. Yeah. And would you say that we successfully cataloged cannabis strains in a way that like benefits the future? I mean, it's not a trick question. I just think I know people on sort of the underground who are doing that, but it wasn't talked about so early in the movement. But so I love that you're like thinking, okay, let's catalog, let's create a library of all these things so it benefits the future and not just us.
Well, in terms of cannabis strains, we still, I think it's true of all psychedelic botanicals, psychedelic mushrooms, cannabis as well. We do not have a full grasp on the genetic diversity and the compounds that are represented in that genetic diversity. Just recently, some Italian researchers, as I understand it, the government provides cannabis to the Italian army. So they grow a considerable amount of cannabis. And some Italian researchers were able to find among the many phenotypes a new form of THC that you might have heard about, THCP. It has a longer alkyl chain, which indicates a higher degree of bioactivity. So, that pushed researchers in the direction of let's look for THC with longer alkyl chains because it might be possible, and actually I'm working on something like this, to construct a pain medication that would be as powerful or as effective as opiate-based medicines. without any of the addiction or harm associated with the opiates. So I think we're just scratching the surface. Another area is in psychedelic mushrooms. There's all these very small, minute compounds that are, in fact, represented in only 1 or 2 mushrooms. And so people haven't really had an opportunity to be exposed to them. And some of them may provide an incredible experience. There's indications that, I'm thinking of one in particular, that seems to take away the negative or dystopian aspects of the experience, removes paranoia and anxiety, and just leaves the self-realization aspect in place. So there's a lot out there that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, that's the thing that's a little unfortunate with psilocybin, right? And well, sourcing for all of us is unfortunate currently, especially in America, but the different strains feel different. You have different experience with different strains, but when you get something like a mushroom chocolate or a microdose mushroom capsule that you'd get, I don't know, in Venice somewhere at Erewhon, you have really no idea like what mushroom strains in there, the source of where it came from. Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much. It's amazing. Okay, cool. Let's do a couple more questions. Madison, what say you?
Oh man, there's at least 3 more really good questions here I'd like to get to. So one of them is surrounding mental health issues. Obviously, people that are interested in this kind of help, they have mental health issues. So what are the implications of like risks for microdosing and macrodosing for the type of people that, like myself, who need this but aren't really sure quite what is safe for us?
Jen, I bet you have some ideas on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated conversation, and it also includes like medication, which is a tricky aspect of it, which a nice thing about psilocybin is that it doesn't necessarily, like there's not the risk for like serotonin syndrome the way there would be with taking antidepressants and doing ayahuasca, for instance. But there is an effect of antidepressants make psychedelics less effective, or at least psychedelics that work with the serotonin receptors. So there is that kind of aspect of how are you going to handle that, and what actually are you moving towards? So I think it depends on what the psychological issue is, or what the mental health situation is. The big thing that people mostly think of is like psychosis or schizophrenia, and the concept that this could actually induce that, because schizophrenia especially it shows up at interesting times in lives and can be initiated by major psychedelic experiences. So, and I won't speak to, I'm not a doctor or researcher on that level, but so I won't fully speak to what microdosing can do, but I think that it's a really interesting area to be studying, of how safe can it be for people who are in more at-risk mental health situations? Because the whole concept of sub-perceptive, sub-psychedelic, it really is basically, it's different than what we all imagine as a psychedelic at that point. Like, it's not making the world look trippy. It's not making your mind work in this crazy different way. You're still you, everything else is still the way it is, but with kind of an expanded perspective. So I think that it's, I wouldn't like prescribe to somebody, I don't prescribe to people, but I think it's a really interesting avenue to explore for, especially, schizophrenia type areas, but also personality disorders. I think can be really an interesting area for microdosing specifically, because a big dose might send somebody into a really ungrounded place that's not productive. But microdosing can actually help you in a really stable way build a relationship with yourself and understand yourself more and have more openness to others. So I think having that as a groundwork, possibly moving towards bigger doses, but as an entry point that's not, that's just a lot more stable and has a lot fewer risks. It's a huge reason that I'm very supportive of microdosing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think with that section of the population or that part of the experiment, right? The people who have serotonin or other hormonal imbalances, bipolar, schizophrenia, these like very serious mental health disorders, PTSD, uh, they're either living with them now or they have them in the past. Like that's where the conversation around safety, regulation, responsibility is super, super key because first of all, we all have mental health. Like that we all, if you have a mind, like you have either a healthy mind or a not healthy mind or somewhere in between. So mental health is relevant to every single person considering to consume a psychedelic or anything else, just by being a human on planet Earth. But then, what we don't want in this psychedelic revolution is to really go over the edge and put people in danger. And there's still so much we don't know about schizophrenia, for example, and other conditions of the like. So I think that's where it's really amazing that the academic research is being done to keep people safe.
I would like
and to add too that like those are the areas where it's support. Like that's why we need therapists trained in psychedelics and guides and other coaches and whatever. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out with decriminalization and medical model coming in, what training things will exist, but the more education and the more trained people, and especially trained mental health practitioners who understand how psychedelics work, but also fully understand how to support somebody with schizophrenia or bipolar, that can cross over the two, because it's not just like take the psychedelic, it might fix you. Like once you're into the deeper, more entrenched mental health issues, it's not a magic bullet. So having the support and education alongside of it.
Let's be very clear. It's never a magic bullet. You are the magic bullet. Psychedelics, anything else will not save you. You will save yourself. They're a powerful tool in the toolbox. But yeah, definitely heard, Jen. You were going to say something, Flor?
Yes, I wanted to leave besides the psychedelic, because what I've observed that the psychedelic does is really plug our heart to the power, right? Heart or spirit or soul. And I think that the reason why we have so mental health disorders is because our heart is never really addressed. And what I've noticed working with people that psychedelic really helps do is kind of acknowledge which are the rocks that we carry in our heart every time that our heart break and keep on breaking, and the trauma that we can keep on carrying all our lives. And there is no place where we can go and heal that heart. And eventually, when we keep on along all our lives carrying these stones in our heart, eventually it affects our mind. So even before getting into a psychoactive, it's just to sit and it's like, okay, when is the first time that I acknowledged that my heart got broken? I remember being 6 in school. I got a bad teacher, and whatever that story was for you, right? Just to identify that. And I think that is a great point where to start. And then eventually, if it's in a microdose or if with a therapist that you can do maybe MDMA now as it becomes legalized, what are the tools that we have to address our heart and understand that that is in essence the space that the psychoactive is going to take us to address our heart, and maybe that is intention that we bring to have insight. And I think that start to clarify a bit of why we may have this disorder. What are the pains that we carry in our heart, these these stones that we can take out, and then our mind start to heal. And I think just as a place to reflect upon, to identify that there is a correlation between the heart and the emotions and the mind, and that not necessarily psychology or psychiatry make that connection, and psychoactive can be that plug.
Totally, 100%. There are different methodologies, right, to getting to where we want to be, which I think is happiness for ourselves and for everybody. It's not just a one-stop shop approach. Okay, let's do one more question with Madison. We're going to give away this dope jacket. Then we're going to do one last round, Robin, with all the experts, and then we're gonna go have fun because it's Friday. What do you say, Madison?
That sounds great. It's hard to pick the final question here, but one that really stuck out to me was, how can we ensure the sacredness of these medicines are protected as we forecast legalization and industrialization?
Really good question. I think, I think part of it is by taking ownership and growing your own psychedelics. That way you don't have to source them through an indigenous group if you possibly can. And growing mushrooms, I think, is pretty much accessible to everybody.
That's a great question, or a great answer, I'm sorry. If you don't mind, there was actually another one in here that I think more people can address, is about mixing substances and then alternating substances. So if one were to like to microdose psilocybin and then they also enjoy microdosing LSD, is there a certain kind of practice that they should follow between them?
Between those two, since they work on the same receptor sites, part of the protocols with psilocybin and LSD microdosing is taking at least 2 days off a week to kind of like resensitize your receptor sites, 2 to 3 days off a week consecutively. So I would say you would treat that part of the protocol the same way, just to keep your receptor sites sensitized. And I would probably do it in chunks, just so you can really be experiencing what the difference is. But I think there's something to using the substance for what you're doing that day. Like if you have a more creative problem solving situation that you have that day, maybe LSD is your jam for microdosing. 2 days later, you have like a social situation where you want to really connect with people. Psilocybin can be better for that. I don't see any flaw with combining them, but I think you would just want to follow the similar protocols as though they were the same. They're working on the same system, so you'd want to take the same kind of breaks that you would if it was just one substance.
I'm going to jump in here and say I'm not a doctor, but from experience, I would encourage people to get to know a substance on its own, right? And that takes, because you're not like dosing every single day, or maybe you are, but that takes a minute, right? Like just like getting to know a human being, like takes a while for that bond to form. So I would suggest that, like getting to know one substance at a time. And here's the thing too, in my experience, if you're interested in a sub-perceptual dose, even if you want to kind of perceive it a little bit, it's like first thing in the morning, empty stomach, even with coffee, that can help catapult it in some instances. Like that really gives you an understanding of what you're dealing with. And then as you become an expert and experienced for yourself, maybe consider adding things. But of course, safety first. Anyone else on that question? Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because we're in this space now where we live in America, and there's no protocol, and we're not making suggestions because these things are illegal. But I know philosophically, for me, it's always important that you kind of like take it a step at a time and be patient with each substance.
And one thing I would say is, like, I noticed that cannabis, for instance, THC, tends to amplify, right? So let's say that I'm on a microdose of mushroom and I take cannabis, it amplifies. So sometimes instead of taking, like, let's say with MDMA, the same, you can take not such a bigger dose, but if you want a booster, maybe having a puff of a joint, in that joint, not tobacco, just weed, it amplifies the effect. The same with acid, right? So I think that if you're using synthetic, let's say with MDMA or LSD, and then you have a puff of a joint, it would amplify the effect, right? And so you don't need to keep on increasing the dose, especially when the same with ketamine, right? Maybe a puff of weed before, and then a small troche of ketamine, make it a way more connected experience with the heart, most mesmerizing, right? So just always to keep this in mind. Synthetic with a top up of THC can amplify, and you don't have to take so much quantity, which, from my perspective, is always the minimum effective dose. That is the ideal dose. And that may completely vary for each one. So just to keep that in mind. And I think also you know, if MDMA is the heart and LSD, you know, kind of sometimes you can in microdose play and see how these feels for you. It's an interesting alchemy to play to be the alchemist of our own body. I think it's always a good exploration to have, but always in microdose and mixing natural and synthetics, like to amplify it and use the minimum effective dose could be a good guidelines that I would recommend for people to try.
Yeah, what a concept, right? Everyone just like conceptualize this real quick. You are your own doctor, your own guru, your own shaman, your own expert. Like you have it all here. Of course, there's experts and they teach us, and that's how human nature works, and that's beautiful. We teach each other things. But ultimately, like all of that expertise that you're seeking, you have it inside of you, the capacity to be your own expert. It just, you know, takes effort and consciousness.
Yes. Beautiful.
All right. Madison, who gets this amazing Hey You Monkey Meet Delic jacket for being awesome?
There were so many great participants. I just picked a name out of random of the people who I saw engaging the most, and Bianca Alexandra is our winner. So Bianca, please send us a direct message, email, get in touch so we can ship this to you. Thank you guys all so much.
Amazing. Congratulations, Bianca. And then FYI to the audience, we're giving you a discount code for jackets like that and other instances with our amazing Meet Delic monkey from Barry Lauren. Shout out to Barry Lauren. We're giving you a discount code called Microdose. So head over to thedelic.com, and you get 11% off all Meet Delic apparel. That code again is Microdose. Okay, amazing. So before we end, we're gonna do just one quick round robin with all the experts. And here, I want you guys to answer this question. What is the number one piece of advice that you would give a new person to psychedelics and somebody interested in microdosing? The number one piece of advice. We'll start with Del.
I want to back up what Flor said about taking it slow and proceeding with caution, upping the dose to a point where you feel like it's an appropriate dose. Don't start with microdosing something that's, you know, going to disrupt your day. I think it's better pursued sub-perceptually.
Beautiful. I love it. Don't accidentally macrodose. Jen, what say you? One piece of advice for someone interested and new to psychedelics and microdosing?
I don't think I can answer one. I'm going to go with education, and in education is like connecting into community, getting resources from communities who are well versed and already connected to each other. There's tons of these portals on the internet, on Instagram. And yeah, educating yourself on all the different ways that psychedelics work, and also in ways to work with yourself while working with psychedelics. And then also, honestly, we all need this just activism, like fight for your rights. We all deserve to have access to these plants. It never should have been taken away in the first place. And you can make a lot of connections and get a lot of support just through the avenues of engaging in fighting for everybody's rights to have more education and access to psychedelics.
I love that activism. It's your right as a human being, ladies and gentlemen, to consume whatever it is that you want to consume. So never forget that. Zak, what one piece of advice would you give people new to psychedelics?
I think a lot of people are taking the first step by being here and being a part of this conversation. And I encourage people to come to the Meet Delic event next year and connecting with other people that are interested in this topic. You don't even have to have microdose. You might not be ready to. And I think we're all, recommending that people take it slow. So be a part of the conversation, which is being a part of the solution, and take personal responsibility. I mean, that's really what this all comes down to. People assume that they can, that this is the magic bullet and this and that and the other. It's just not, it's not true. There's no substitute for hard work, period. And there's no any one substance or experience that's going to fix your problems. So it's a marathon, it's a journey, and be in it for the long haul and, be a source of positivity and encourage others to educate themselves.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. All right, Flor, what one piece of advice would you give?
Yeah, backing up what everyone said, beautifully put. And I think that in essence is to understand that is exactly, you are your shaman, you heal yourself, identify what do I want to work on, right? Why do I want to get into psychoactive? And I think that the safest way from my mom to everyone that is coming here for the first time, I would say THC, 5 milligrams in an edible. It is a first kind of experience to even tap to that, to get how does it feel to have an entheogen inside my body for the first time and feel into that. And then from there, keep on going in the scale, in the microdose, let's say, I would start with THC, maybe then go into microdose of psilocybin, right? Or maybe microdose of ketamine, but like taking, not getting to the hardcore, to the Everest right away, that there is kind of some of introductory steps. And I think that to go slowly discovering this path of the gods is an initiation process, a rite of passage. And to take it, with that enthusiasm that it has, it's a life's journey. And so to be very clear about the intent of what am I getting here and put the first step in the water. And I think that Maria, as in THC, cannabis is a great introductory and through the digestive more than smoking it.
Beautifully said, my friend. Thank you. All right, Tyler.
All right. Aside from all that great advice, I would offer as well, finding somebody who's a little bit further along in the process than you are. I know for myself, finding a mentor or a person that I looked up to, had been practicing with psychedelics for a long time, really helped me work through a lot of the anxieties and fears that I had going into it. And a lot of people are just afraid to ask for help or seek out advice. Like, a lot of people are here to get advice from us, but it could be personal too. So if you find somebody further along in the process that you trust and feel supported by, that can be extremely helpful as you go along.
Thank you, sir. All right, our next live event, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Friday, July 24th at noon. We're going to talk about this topic everyone's it's on their mind, psychedelic and business. I'm of the mind that business is an art form. That's how I experience it, and that's how I've experienced my mentors interact with it as well. And so how interesting, right, to talk about business where people have very polarizing opinions about it, and psychedelics now that it's emerging and people are even talking about going public and all these things. So July 24th at noon, psychedelic business. I want to thank you to the experts. Go see what they're up to. We're going to put how to reach them on the show notes and social media and all the places that it needs to be. These people took time out of their busy schedules. I want to thank you guys so much. I want to thank my staff, who's coincidentally all female currently, kicking ass and taking names. I really appreciate you guys. And then ultimately, you guys, thank you for listening. Meet Delic 2021, May 1st and 2nd. It's going to be like amazing and super fun. So thank you guys so much. Peace and love.
Thanks, everybody.
Later, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations.